Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Correll, and I am here with one of my favorite persons on the planet. No kidding about that, Jan Jeremias. It's been almost 10 days since you and I looked each other in the eye online, and I've missed you, and I'm really glad you're back here today. I know we have a lot to talk about, and I just want to also mention that we spent a good amount of time the other day talking about spring and rebirth and upgrading and all that sort of thing. But you and I were chatting before we came on today, and since the whole idea of where we go in our conversations is to generate empowerment, I really think that it's okay to tell people every once in a while that you're a little tired, and I just think that it's more important really, to just be authentically who you are, than to try to please people or try to, slip through an instance and, survive it, if you will. Good Lord, don't survive it. Get that person killed and out of the way so you can get on with your life. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's so interesting that you bring that up. And I didn't get to listen to it, but I mentioned to you that I had been on with a LinkedIn friend online who works in leadership development. And he shared with me a YouTube, I think it was, a recording. And I'm going to look up the title because it was just to that. It was, it was I think it was from Heart Math Institute. And it was like, so it said, well, either that or it's on Instagram comment on authenticity. The highest frequency isn't love. It's actually when people can be authentically themselves.
Amen.
And so it was just really interesting. And I have to go back and watch it because, I got on the meeting and then got into other meetings and I haven't had time. But this whole idea, you used the key word of authenticity and being authentic. And that's what it reminded me of.
So let's just kind of stay with that for a minute or two. There's being authentic, and then there's also being, a pain in the ass, not taking care of anybody around you while you're, throwing up all over the world. That's not good. Being authentic is also having some responsibility about who you are in the world, and not only what people think of you, but what you think of yourself. You have to honor your own self first. Does that make sense?
Well, and so when we were having this conversation this morning, I said, in a way, that energy or that high vibration that comes from people when they're truly authentic, and they're together and they can be themselves, basically. There's no reason like you and I are ourselves. Like there's no reason to sit there and say, okay, well, and there are instances where we don't feel comfortable doing that. It happens to be that we feel comfortable. But I was saying I think that's the power of, let's say, yoga, I said, and doing it in a group class setting. I said, it's one of the things that happens. I said, you cannot be anything but be authentically you when you're on your mat, because otherwise you might fall on your face at some point because you're doing something, or whatever. But there is something about practicing in a room together, which only which is amazing. And being in person with each other and practicing with each other. And it's not like you're dancing with that person because you're not, you're really in your own practice, but
Yeah.
yet you're with others. So that's what it reminded me of, was that might explain to me, and because heart math tends to be quite scientific, and so that might be, which I love the science, so kind of substantiates what we all know, is that when we can be authentically ourselves, then we are in a better space and we feel better.
And the I think the true test of authenticity is not noticing. You're so present, your attention's not on yourself. If your attention's on yourself, you're really not actually communicating with the rest of the world. You're too busy being concerned about something other than being present. So, access to authenticity, and it's almost like the code words that unlock your superpower, is when you're playing full out and you're getting into other people's worlds and you're being yourself at a a bigger than life level. What comes back is amazing. It's just incredible, what that brings forward. And while you were talking about being in a yoga class, um, about 25 years ago, I ended up spending close to a month in a hospital. And one of the things I did when I got out was to do yoga. I did it 5 days a week with my wife at home. I was about 45 pounds overweight, in horrible shape, having really not moved very much in 5 or 6 months. And then I went to a yoga class. And the most blessed event that could have possibly happened was, I broke wind, and then somebody on the other side of the room broke wind too, and then we all busted out in laughter. And it was just like, you know, the joke is there were probably four or five other people that were fighting at the same time because we were doing really intense torso work, that just moves things around. And then before you know it, but afterwards, I had these people come over and gave me a big hug and said, you know what you did? You just made this the best yoga class I've been to all year.
Well, it's interesting. I always think it's so interesting, and and it's not even that, and even like you play with that when you're like on your mat, you're in a situation. Like it's
Yeah.
like you go through the inner. I want to say the inner, almost like, and I don't like battle sounds like a bad word, but it
Yep.
kind of the inner dialogue or the inner ramifications of like, why can't I be different? Why can't I do that? Like, look at them. They're older than I am and they can do it,
Right.
and all the things that we say to ourselves about, generally speaking, when we navigate life with other people or with ourselves. And yet there's room for all that. And there are days that that dialogue is really loud, that like, that sort of, and then there's days where it's just really quiet and you're really happy to be where you are and you're happy to be breathing and happy to be doing anything at all. And then there are days where no matter what you do, it's just not enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and you know,
Well, what
just
I
to,
like about everything that you're saying is those internal conversations that run themselves about comparing yourself to other people, and getting lost and off track on that. It's kind of like, most people go into a yoga class like it's practice, but the stars go into yoga class like, this is my real life. I'm going to get out of this class what I need today, to feed my soul and to feed my psyche. And what's really kind of like, if you look around, the comparison thing runs out of gas very, very quickly because it's never true. What you think other people are going through. It's like, when I made the initial sound that we were just talking about, I thought, oh God, they're going to throw me out of here after that. And then, what? It was just like, of course, and
right,
that's really what authenticity is that, when you are yourself and you're at a very fundamental, at the level of human being, okay, not at the level of got it made, understand the world, human being, just at the level of what do humans go through together. If you can relate to people from there, you've got access to having this really, really cool way of being that allows you to be comfortable in your skin, and take risks. But you and I both know the most put together people, Tony Robbins gets butterflies. And if he doesn't get butterflies, he's got to stop doing what he's doing because peak performers must get butterflies. There's got to be something at risk.
So, so absolutely. And, so I'll share with you the first part of this poem that I shared with Jason this morning, which was by John Rodell. And it says, "Life became less exhausting once I stopped trying to be the smartest person in the room. Now I just try to be the most human person. I found that nobody in the room really ever misses my shallow insights on geopolitics or economics. The biggest thing people need from me is the space to tell some of their story. And then after a bit, I tell little of mine. And then after some more storytelling, turn taking, we see the soul light in each other peeking out of the corner of our eyes." And so that's what it reminded me of. It's like, it's like that, my can I show up as a human being? And
Yeah, and first it's superficial, right? The stories that you share are the ones that you're pretty sure are going to be okay. They're going to pass.
that's right.
And
And
then as time goes on,
people are gonna laugh, like that kind of thing.
yeah,
And then you start to share deeper. It's kind of like the first date stories, right? The ones, and whether they're still fodder or still fuel, like still something there after you get through all those stories, after you've told all your best stories.
yeah, there's something to that because that's why there are an awful lot of no second dates. Um,
Right.
but I think really an authentic approach doesn't care if there's going to be a second date. This is your life right now, and this is where you play the ace all the time. You don't hold that ace in the hole waiting for the right moment to play it. You play it when you've got a place to play it.
Hmm.
I think the sooner in life that people figure that out, the easier it is for them to ask for things that they consider to be so big that it's inappropriate. Do you know what I mean?
Say that again.
Well, I think the sooner that people realize if you have an ace to play, this means you've spent some time kind of working on what your value in the world is. And so you're standing on that while you're just out being with people. But
Hmm.
having that value is of no consequence unless you get to bring it into being and you get to engage it with other people. So
Hmm.
so the folks that hang out and wait and walk away wishing that they'd said something later on or think of the right thing to say later on are kind of getting a booby prize. You can't have a great life reliving what you did wrong in the past. You got to just do it wrong now. And if it turns out to be okay, holy mackerel, how about that?
Interesting. Yeah, it was just we used to. Yeah, I think that's true. And I agree that I think, but you 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 have to have that, whatever you might want to call it, that foundation. And sometimes you lose that footing. I mean, to be honest, it's like, life wears you down, or all of a sudden you're on unfamiliar terrain and you lose that footing. And it's almost like that recalibration. You have to like get that footing back in whatever way that you can get that footing back to
Yeah.
then forward again. But sometimes you're just, you don't have, something's happened in your life that's kind of thrown you off, and I think that's life, right? That kind of like, this isn't the way I thought it was, and all of a sudden this is the way it is, or whatever. And, or something happens and disrupts, what your feeling of safety, I guess is the best word. And then you
Yeah.
have to find that safety again. I mean, that safety comes from within, but it's that safety that all of a sudden, when your world changes, you start to question. That's what I talked about a few weeks ago with Mary Jane on our Friday audio, was who am I? Like the big questions of like, okay, well, this has happened. And well, now who am I? After all that has fallen away. And that's what happens. And then you kind of find it again, hopefully. and
Well,
then you navigate again.
yeah, exactly. So that's one way to navigate, right? Is to find something again. But it's like trying to stick your toe into a river to touch the same water twice in a row, you know?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
So,
it's not like finding again. To me, it's a remembering.
well,
Eh,
but I'm hearing you also talk about maybe getting to an equilibrium, which that's a feeling that's inside of you that you can have no matter what else has happened, right? You can go from being upset to being not upset to being at peace to actually being a little bit self expressive again to being fully out there and then wanting to go dancing, I mean, that whole spectrum, but where you have to get yourself to when you've gotten knocked down, and mostly the knocking down is psychological, and it has a lot to do with thought distortions. I mean, when you and I are at our worst, we are believing the nonsense. We're believing those sentences that just keep showing up over and over and over, and they're showing up so much they must be true, right? Well, maybe.
maybe exactly, maybe.
But what if they're not,
Oh,
you
and
know?
I don't know that they're not true. I guess in some ways, I think what ends up happening is, let's say, it reminds me of like the negative and the positive, like that, I think what ends up happening is we can't see beyond, let's say, the issue or the negative.
Right.
So, and all we're telling ourselves is the negative. And so it's not like that may not be true. It's just that there's nothing else there. And so that gets to be amplified more and more and more. So I think about, let's say, things I tell myself, and um, and then I think to myself, like, it's part of, like, I think that I always have that feeling, but it's often filtered out or decreased by the fact that there's a lot of other positive stuff there. And at points when you're going through a challenging time, what ends up happening is it's very hard for you to see the positive. Because even as human beings in general, we tend to focus on what's not working versus what's working in our lives. It's kind of like, I was listening to a podcast and this woman said it's kind of like when you give a talk and you're leaving and everybody else thought it was great, and there's one person that makes a negative comment. And what do you remember? You remember the negative comment. Like, that's what
Yeah.
you're concentrating on. It's like, oh my gosh, I did a horrible job just because that one person said something. And that's what happens. Like, that's human nature or human tendency, is to like go into what's not working in our lives. So if I don't know if it's untrue or it's just the fact that you talked about balance, is that the balance is so skewed.
I promise you it's not true. Okay. Honest to God, I have studied this so deeply, and I am a black belt at what's true and isn't true. And let me tell you, none of it's true.
That's
We've
true.
had this conversation before. There's either nothing or BS. I promise you it's BS. Okay. So choose. That was horrible what I did to you.
Okay, go ahead, Bill. I'm fine now.
Sorry about that. I broke you up while you're taking a drink.
Go
But,
ahead.
but see, that's perfect. What I'm saying is this: there's 80,000 thoughts a day. Whether there is or there isn't, I don't know, but it sounds comfortable to say what I've heard, right? So if we got 80,000, that gives us lots of choices as to which ones we're going to empower. Which ones are we going to spend time working with? Which ones are we going to stand? And will we be like, authenticity is being able to hear a negative comment and just accept it without the need to do anything with it. Do you see what I'm saying? If there's something there where you actually need to correct or fix that sentence, and that becomes what you are kind of wrestling with, then the rest of life is passing you by. There's no authenticity or presence or being mindful or any of that stuff that's available to you right now. You are otherwise engaged. You may as well just put a big old "do not disturb" sign on your face, and just go through life like that. And people will know not to bother you. You're busy wrestling with something that isn't true. So the neat part of that is is in the design of your own life. If you're going to be the author, right? You know that old saying, you're either the author of your life or you're a walk-on part in somebody else's, right?
Mm.
So why not be authoritarian? And I mean like absolute power in terms of determining, I'm not going to listen to that. I hear it, but that's not mine. Don't own it. You know what I'm saying? And then immediately look for a sentence that is yours. That's, yes, but I'm lovable. I'm cute. I have the sweetest salt and pepper hair anybody ever did in the face of the planet. And I'm quite satisfied with that for the moment. Thank you. So, above and beyond that, I mean, because really that's kind of like minimizing the trauma that people really do feel about very serious matters. However, the significance part of it is something that you and I invent. It doesn't come with any significance attached to it. It has to do with our attachment to a particular outcome and how this so much doesn't resemble what we thought should be happening or was going to happen. And that difference can be really devastating for people.
I've been that's where I've been a lot lately.
Yeah.
Um, in evaluating my life. And I think that, this is, let's say, not where I thought I'd be at this point in my life. And that has been a real challenge of late. Like, I just, and I'm not saying it just is, this is not at all how I thought things would come out, turn out at all, in so
Yep.
many ways, in so many different aspects of my life. And, and that has been really challenging. The only thing I would have to say about, like, tell yourself, you're cute or whatever, tell yourself something you believe.
Yeah.
That is what I would say. They really believe, like, because if you basically, and I'm not saying lie to yourself, but if you say to yourself something that you don't believe about yourself, your brain's going, that's not true. That's not true. I don't feel
Yes.
that. So just make sure whatever you're telling yourself is something that you firmly believe. Like, oh, okay, and I'm in the positive. Like you said, I'm cute. I like my salt and pepper hair, like whatever it is. Like, I'm creative, or, I'm a great teacher. I believe that.
Yeah.
And I can say something like that to myself. There are other things which I might not believe, whether they might be true about me, but at that point when I'm telling myself, maybe I think, you're full of it when you say that, kind of thing to yourself. And your brain knows that that's what you believe. And your brain's sitting there going, like, you're saying that to yourself, but you don't believe that for a minute.
And if that doesn't make you laugh, so I'm saying you can say anything you want to. You can start with something you think you believe, but the thing that you don't believe might be the thing that's true.
Oh,
Like
yes, absolutely.
undeniably, completely objectively, you could ask 45 people and 45 of them would say, this is what's true about Jan.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's always a really useful exercise, just to
Yeah.
ask people, like, how they would describe you, adjectives they would use to describe you.
Yeah.
Because most likely you're going to sit there and you're going to read them and you're going to be like, really? Like, I don't see myself like that at all, or maybe you do, but most of the people I know would sit there and say, really? I don't see that in myself.
Well, there is that. Okay. But I think we're pointing to something here. It's almost, let's just say it's very difficult, especially for highly intelligent, well trained people, to not be taken down by something that they believe that's true. And those thought distortions that are taking away your self expression and making you feel down in the dumps and all the rest of that, I want to tell you, they're not the only truth. They may have some truth behind them. They may be something that's not quite completely understood or identifiable. However, there are more truths that are good than the ones that are bad. Okay. Just if you start with that as like a what if? What if there are more truths that are good than the ones that are bad? I've always found that there's two things you can do: try to get through it alone, or call somebody you love and trust. And I'm going to tell you, Doing it alone can keep you in the same place for days. Calling somebody that you love and trust and say, hey, I'm going through a tough day today. This is what it seems like to me. What do you got? And if you got a smart person on the other end of the phone, they will say, is this a conversation where you just want me to listen? Or is this a conversation where you'd like some advice? Or is this a conversation where you're coming for an answer? But otherwise, it might just be somebody who says, okay, Jan, shoot, what's on your mind? And that, engaging another human being does one really cool thing. It tosses a question into the air. What if what I'm experiencing right now isn't the only possibility for me today? What if? Um, and sometimes it's difficult, especially I think for people who have a very strong sense of self, if you will. There are some people in life, when they show up in a room, they sort of command attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't the people who are necessarily going to reach out and ask for somebody else's opinion very often. But those are the people who most likely need to the most.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get to the point, where you're authentic with a couple of people, and then and you don't like try to get to be authentic, you just are. It's like bearing your soul to another human being is hard as hell before you do it and while you're doing it, but afterwards it's cathartic. It's like feeling an elimination of pressure and stress, especially when your worst fears are not realized, where they don't say, well, if that's your problem, my God, I don't want to know you. Aren't we kind of worried about that from time to time?
Yeah, and I find it's interesting because it's the feeling like, part of what happens is you're talking about um sharing with someone else if they're like listening is if they in some element agree with what you like have been there or understand, there is this feeling of comfort because I think I'm not, and this isn't like, I think I'm not the best at this. I tend to, keep very close, keep a guard up. But I think what ends up happening is that when you're in that safety, like part of what happens when you don't talk to anybody is you tend to feel like you're the only one in the world who feels like this, you know? So, you know, and, and so let's say, and so just something, with something I was sharing with someone recently, and we were talking, and just the fact that they were like, oh, okay, yeah, I can understand that, kind of thing makes you feel better just because you feel like, okay, well, not that we need to have our grievances or our fears substantiated, but I think we do have this feeling of, like I said, like you're the only one in the world that's navigating this issue or that's, worried about something, whatever it be, you know,
Yeah.
going on in the world or whatever. And it could be, you're just like, okay, well, it's nice to know there are other people in the world who feel like I do at this point.
Yeah, and then you get to the point where you realize it's the design of human beings to feel broken. It's part of our survival technique, is that our preparation when there's no threat or stress around is to induce and invent stress for ourselves so we'll be prepared if it occurs. Now, that goes back to when we were cave people running across the desert being chased by a big furry animal. Um, we have different kinds of stresses and threats these days, and a lot of them are mentally induced by either watching television or social media or something of that nature. And then I think you almost have to take some responsibility as to what you're letting into your life and to whether or not all of your choices are healthy.
Oh
and
no,
start to make decisions, you know?
no, absolutely. I so feel like that. I mean, I do think that we were not meant to. I think in general, like I spoke to the fact that in general, we tend to concentrate on the negative versus the positive, just as human nature. And I think bombarding yourself, or I mean, this isn't a thing that I do, but bombarding yourself with negative outward, like outside input of, let's say,
Right.
social media and news on a constant basis of 24 hours, where you're being fed, fear and worry all the time. And there's no element of a shut off at all. That is so damaging. It's so damaging as far as navigating the world. I mean, it's just, it puts you in this very fearful flight mode all the time.
Right.
All the time, which is not a place where, I mean, which is a place where basically bad stuff happens, whether it be emotionally or physically. Um, you set yourself up for negative, negative, negative ramifications.
So that's the Samuel Clemens Mark Twain quote, right? I've experienced any number of traumas, some of which actually happened, you know?
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. And, but I agree with you, because I think it is, that ability is to turn that stuff off
Yeah.
is really within your own control.
There's a I think one of the things that I really enjoy watching, we have a couple of television shows that we watch, and one of them, the protagonist is just an expert at allowing people to vilify him, let them completely talk themselves out, and then he asks, "Is there anything else?" And he should be like a little bowl of spaghetti, with all these people around that don't know him, listening to what this person is saying. But then he stands up and he says, "You may have a point. Let's see if we can examine the facts here." And then one thing after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, until the guy finally says, "You know what? I completely misstated everything, didn't I?" But he doesn't make the guy bad and wrong while he's doing it. He doesn't give him any, emotion. He just basically says, "Let's just examine the facts here." And if you and I can learn how to develop that skill in terms of listening to ourselves, or ourselves, and be able to drop back for a moment and say, "Hey, I do understand that this seems really urgent and pressing right now. And I'm at the level of fight or flight. I mean, that means there's no logic going on here at all. It's purely emotional, trying to survive. Um, let's just see what parts of this are really, that earth shattering. What if at the end of the inquiry, we come up with maybe one or two things we can actually do something about and put ourselves back in action again? Because action is the antidote to being down. Some kind of action, like you say, sometimes it's just getting up and going outside for a walk. Change where you are.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when you're in that, let's say, state of panic,
Yep.
there's really little room for mind negotiation, like, or
Amen.
altering your thought pattern. Like, it's just not going to happen. I mean, it's just like, you're basically holding your breath. And so, like, let's say, in that kind of feeling, it might not be literally, but like that's how it feels. And there's no room for, you know, that there's no room in some way for, and so maybe that next thought is, let me go for a walk. Let me do something like that's, when I say mindless, and the fact that it's rote, wash dishes, sweep the floor, do
Right.
laundry, clean your house, garden, but something that requires almost very little brain demand, and
Yep.
much more of being like you're working toward being present. So it's just much more like, okay, well, can I go outside for a few moments, take a walk, and at least break that pattern and getting outside of the four walls? Can I, you know, I spent last week I was at my mom's, so could be that I cleaned her floor. Like I mean, it wasn't doesn't have to be your own. Could be someone else's stuff you're doing, but it is action, like you said, it is an activity to do.
Yep.
Um, it's a really interesting place to be. Is that But when you're in that, there's no there's no negotiating almost at that point. Then maybe after the walk, there might be some negotiating. There might be a little bit of wiggle room where maybe all of a sudden there wasn't an inch of space. Now maybe there's a 16th or, or something, of space. And then all of a sudden, to have like a conversation with yourself or to question something about whether something is true, but you've got to get there.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying is spot on. It's almost like wetting your finger and sticking it into a wall outlet. You know, you don't get a vote on how that feels. There's just nothing else other than I got to get away.
Right.
And that getting that little bit of space, if you're in the middle of a car accident, you got to get through all of that, and then get away, to kind of reassess and decide if there's something that needs to change. Um, but I like the idea of calling 911. I really do. And set your calls up in advance when you don't need them, okay? And be working on, a couple of committed friends that you can share this responsibility with, and that you've talked over what it would be like, if one of you needed the other. And we say that all the time. There are, at the end of all of our podcasts for about the last year, at Eric's request initially, but now it's just something I think makes sense, of calling and letting somebody know, that your world works because they're in it. What would you have to do in some cases to prove to somebody that you're not just, blowing smoke? You can't just say that one time and have everybody get it, right? It's not the same for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there is that, constant reminder or close off, like, or whatever is, if you need to chat, or if you have a chat, like, and I think too, one of the points we made in the beginning, having done this, like helping people to realize that if they are authentic, that you're not like my suggestion is don't be overly quiet if you've had if somebody's opened up afterwards, because obviously the next question in their mind, because I've been there, is, oh my gosh, did I share too much? Did I say too much?
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Did I open up too much? Like those are all the questions. And so if you can be there for someone afterwards, like the next morning and whatever, or you send them a message, then they realize that, okay, they're still my friend. I opened up and I spilled my guts and I aired all my dirty laundry kind of thing. And they still want to, and they still think I'm a great person. And they still want to hang out with me,
Yeah.
because I think the tendency is like all of a sudden that fear kicks in because you're like, oh my gosh, like I really said that, like like buyer's remorse, but in the conversation sense,
Yep.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a decision to choose vulnerability over safety, and the only real way to get authentic um, returns on your investments is by being vulnerable. We're all concerned we're going to get found out. I mean, like, so what? I mean, seriously, we're going to get found out. um but we all have that a little bit going on in the back of our mind, and sometimes it looks like any sort of challenge at whatever level is on the road to getting found out. So I've always found, like, the best idea is to turn yourself in at the beginning. Now, I really don't know what I'm talking about right now. I mean, and this whole podcast is a caveat. Listen to me where I'm saying what I'm saying, not like it's true, but pick the stuff that works for you. You know what I mean? Now I
Mm.
don't have to worry about if I'm plagiarizing because I am. I don't have any original thoughts. I'm 70 years old. I've interacted with thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people. I don't remember where I heard this. Do you? And I'm not going to keep track of where I heard it. I don't have that time or interest, you know? But I do want to engage with people and I do want them to go away with maybe having one more thought in a dark moment that allows them to spend just a little bit less time there and a little bit more, easily accessible to I can get up and get out of here. It's like I'm roller skating and I fell down. Well, what do you do when you fall down and you're roller skating? You get the hell back up again, right? We don't give ourselves that space sometimes, do we?
Well, no, I think because as adults, we feel like, not that we even have to like, it's like when you're a kid and you fall down, you think it's hysterical.
Right.
Like, you remember purposefully falling down and just cracking up, like, and thinking it was hysterically funny, like, making
Yeah.
yourself dizzy so that you would even fall down, like
Yeah.
intentionally like doing that. And then there comes to be a point where, for whatever reason, we're afraid, like you said, we're afraid we're going to be judged. We're afraid we're going to be told, like, called a name or like something specific is going to be said about us.
Yeah.
And we
Or just
stop.
plain looking bad, just plain looking bad.
That's right. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, and then that kicks in and then we don't do it anymore. Then
Right.
we like, we try to navigate the world, guarding ourselves from falling down ever again.
And gee whiz, that doesn't sound like much of an existence to me. I mean, it's one way to go. And I think there are a lot of people that do that, but they also haven't had a conversation with you or me.
True. That's true.
Or
They
why
haven't.
would somebody who has an unknown number of breaths and seconds and time awake, why would anyone waste that time other than they're more committed to looking good than they are to feeling good? You know what I'm saying? I think the commitment to feeling good should outweigh everything else and find a way for us to all feel good, if you will.
Mhm. This morning, when I was teaching, we were talking about, use the word balance and harmony. Like, that's what
Yeah.
we were talking about. I don't know, centered. I told people to kind of pick their word. And one of the things I said, if you think about that word, and then, like, what does it feel like in your body? Like, how does that feel? Like, what
Yeah.
does that sensation feel like to you? Not for me. I can tell you what it feels like for me, but I want, but what does it feel like for you? And then ask yourself, okay, well, that's what let's say I am feeling that way. What does that feel like? And then how am I feeling now? So, not in a like judgmental, like, this is where I am right now. Like, I don't feel centered, or I do feel centered, or, whatever it is, or grounded or balanced. I just, and then just because I like this idea of what does it feel like? You know, Because I think then you get to, it's almost like a little measurement. It's kind of like a little tester of, like, is this too, like, you put your finger in something and you say, okay, too hot, too cold. Well, then it's kind of like you do something and you're like, okay, this just didn't feel right. But this just didn't feel good. You know,
Yeah.
this is like, and then you do stuff and you're like, oh, okay, that felt good, and then you move on from there. You had a conversation and you're like, that didn't feel so good. And not to, have to overly analyze it, or maybe you just question it and say, okay, well, what about that conversation didn't feel right? Or did I show up authentically? Or did I, pretend, and therefore it was superficial, or maybe that person wasn't the right, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
then maybe you move on from there afterwards. You just keep navigating the world of like,
See, the whole notion of smart people is it's they're more like, and I'm one, okay. When I notice it, it's blessed, but we all are. We're all looking for the easiest way to get through the maze and get the piece of cheese. And unfortunately, those ideas or tactics or formulas, they rarely work more than a couple of times in a row on really big things in your life, which is why you have to be in the mode of producing and responding to what's really going on, as opposed to just trying to reprocess something the same way you did something else. So we're really talking about human beings being smart rats, that because they mastered one maze and get the piece of cheese quickly every single time, change the maze a little bit, and sometimes it's only moving one small little piece of the wall. They'll never figure it out after that because they're so accustomed to getting it right the way that they were doing it. So this notion of having to unlearn another behavior, some people will try to do that, but that's not even the way out. The scientific approach is just stop doing what you're doing and do something different.
yeah, I think there is, and when I say acceptance, I don't mean it in regard to like the other word I might use is resignation. It's just like it's really this element of learning. Let's say in yoga we talk about having like that we each have our own internal blueprint.
Yep.
And for me, it's navigating my practice according to that blueprint. Okay. I'm not trying to have Bill's blueprint, you know, I'm trying to own my own blueprint. And so it's navigating the world and kind of learning about yourself and saying, okay, good or bad, this is my tendency.
Yep.
This is the way I navigate the world, not in a bad way, just in a way of like, okay, that's the way. And I'm not saying you're not working to change, but I think what ends up happening is when you do that, there is this element of compassion and understanding that comes in for yourself, because
Yes.
otherwise you're constantly wishing you were different. It's kind of, why can't I be more like so and so? And I had that experience, and all of a sudden I realized, it's like you wake up one day and you're like, but I'm not them,
Yeah. And there's this propensity for people to unconsciously adopt the behaviors of people that they admire,
Oh no, absolutely.
as if the good things in that person's life will then transfer to them, as opposed to, yeah, take what they're doing that seems to work, but now play it out and go beyond that for yourself. Now kind of like amplify the parts that really fit you, you know and that whole notion of being an under construction model as opposed to a cooked and finished one. The cooked and finished one is going to end up being resigned a lot more than the person that's up to something in their life and has committed to ongoing growth and development. When you don't think you're done yet, you're more willing to laugh at yourself, and you're more willing to get up off the ground quickly after you've fallen on your skates, than you are if you're the resigned person who's like, no, this is as good as it gets. It's never going to be any different or any better than this. Well, for people who believe that, it's a true story.
Yeah, and I love what you said, because I think that I can name areas in my life where I was very, like I always use this example because I remember it so vividly. I remember when I was in yoga teacher training, and my teacher that I did my training with was wonderful and was a phenomenal teacher. And I think being new to teaching, we all did. We all went out trying to teach like her. trying to be her, trying to teach like her. She had huge classes, like, whatever, a lot of people that would come and everything. And then waking up one day saying to myself, like, I can't teach like her because I'm not her.
Yeah.
And that was really kind of, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can't teach like her. I have to teach like me, and that was huge. I remember that to that extent because I remember sitting there and really working. And I'm not saying I think we all do that, especially when it's something new, because we are copying from somebody basically because they've taught us. And then eventually, kind of as time goes on, that whole idea of finding your own voice, like you find your own voice. You phrase things the way you phrase them. You
Yeah.
articulate, you bring, whatever your sense of humor is to the situation. All those elements of yourself end up coming through, but that takes time. I mean, it has to, it takes almost like there's like an evolution that has to happen. You have to evolve into it. And, somebody recently was talking to somebody who was thinking of doing a yoga teacher training, and a friend of mine asked me if I would talk to her because she was trying to decide which program to do or whatever. And I said to her, the most valuable thing I ever did was actually develop my own home practice outside of class, like practice on my own, basically, which is like just moving however I wanted to move, because I had to feel it. I had to be able to experience it, to explain it to people, to share it with people. I said, yes, I did all the whatever, but I had to own it, kind of thing. And I think that that's, no matter what we do, if we're trying to, we've got to play.
That's so important.
You got to play.
Darn it.
You got to play.
Well, we all know that the access to wisdom is, a lot of pain. Um, but you don't have to experience pain as pain. I mean, you can experience it at any level that you want to. I know people who have, it's the old story of an athlete who loses a limb and then goes on and completes, a gold medal competition, in the Olympics or something like that anyway.
Mhm.
Um, the, the thing of it is that the strength of your self-talk, I think more than anything, it may start out like you're conning yourself or BSing yourself, but you really do have to install a new set of beliefs to get where you want to go in the world. It's not going to happen on its own. There's just too much out there that requires effective action on your part to be successful. But if you think about it, we talked about this in the last podcast, but it's appropriate here too. The whole notion of wisdom and authenticity. I'm now seeing that the two of those are kind of like on an even plane with each other. There's no need to be inauthentic for a wise person. A wise person just is quiet when they need to be, and they make a difference when it's called for. But we were talking about, the age old question. Well, what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is good judgment. And where does good judgment come from? Well, good judgment comes from experience. And where does experience come from? Well, mostly bad judgment. We laughed then too, and we said, so the road to success has how many times a day can I plan to fail so that I can get my butt moved ahead, as opposed to staying where I am comfortably, safely, and miserably.
Yeah, there's something that I love that. But when you said what is wisdom, and I thought experience.
Yeah,
And was my first word that came to mind was
absolutely.
experience, which I think anybody of any, I don't know, I've always said that, when people say to me, oh, wouldn't we like, don't you want to be younger? Like, you know what I mean? Wouldn't you like to turn back the clock or whatever? And I'm like, no, I have no desire, maybe in like one or two aspects, but I said in general, absolutely not. I said, I've worked really hard to get here. And I don't want to lose. If I could go back with all the wisdom I have now, yeah, that would be a different story.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't just wanna turn back the clock and go back 30 years,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it was kind of sobering. I have a relative, um, my cousin's daughter, granddaughter, actually, my cousin's granddaughter. He passed, but his first wife is still very, very active in this young girl's life. She just graduated from high school, and so there's been backs and forth. And so there was a comment today, um, and then I responded to the graduation like, "Oh, this is really great, and now what's next?" So her grandmother responds by saying she's going to Humma Humma Denver University, whatever, Humma Humma. And so then, of course, I had to say, well, what's she going to be studying? And she said, I don't know what she's going to study, but she'll definitely be an entrepreneur. And so she'll probably end up doing, some kind of economics or something like that. And I said, well, you know what? And she said, it's always so hard for freshmen because they have no idea of what's available out there and what different kinds of careers have to offer in terms of satisfaction and lining up with skill sets they've already got and maybe some things that are internally driving them as to what they really like to have and desire. And I thought, yeah, I spent my first year at the University of Colorado chasing an aerospace engineering degree. I thought that there might be some cool stuff going on after 1972 in the aerospace area. No, we never did anything with that, did we? But the point is that I wound up in my several different stints in college along the way of being a business major with a minor in economics, and didn't finish either one of those, and went out and went to work in manufacturing and grew there, and then started my own company when I was 35. So none of which was predictable, none of which had anything to do with what I believed I could do. I certainly didn't believe I could do any of that after I flunked out of the University of Colorado when I was 19 years old. And that was one of the hard places that I was in my life. And thank God I had people around, not immediate family really, because I think they were pretty embarrassed, for my failure. But I had to fail in order to go meet my wife. I mean, I got so many good things out of blowing that year off. And what I took away from it was not education as much as it was experience. And that experience basically told me it doesn't matter how much you spend on anything in your life, get the most out of everything that you do whenever you're doing it. And that was the lesson that I took away from that.
Mhm. No, I mean, I think that, like I said earlier, that this isn't at all where I thought I'd be. And, and really, is it ever? Like, I mean, life is not like that. I mean,
Right.
maybe if you're so, attached, like we said, if you have a plan, like, and you're so attached to that plan or a way of being, then you kind of navigate the world based on that being, like that small, very limited form of yourself. But it is limiting. There it is limiting because
Absolutely.
we can
Yeah.
only imagine so much. And when we have an idea about something, we've cut out all possibility.
I think what you're saying hits me, and it's my personal judgment that all satisfaction in life comes with a commitment to continuously develop. When you stop developing, you stop giving yourself new experiences, you stop giving yourself growth, and you stop giving yourself, I'm going to just say, you stop giving yourself many opportunities to fail, which is why when you think about a 25-year-old changing jobs and moving into an area that he or she has no experience with whatsoever, but they're just pretty smart people, it's called a challenge. They're not supposed to get it right away. And a good manager and mentor can see the areas that need to have tweaks,
Mhm.
the little 5% here and there that get people moving in the right direction so that they're getting the frequent, what I like to call mastering the mundane on the way to becoming a master. because you can't be a master until you've mastered bad judgment. And I mean, over and over and over again, in my humble opinion.
In your
But
humble
what do
opinion.
I know?
So here we are once again, my friend.
We did it again. But I'll tell you what, I'm quite generous with my conversations about our little chats. I absolutely adore our time together. I look forward to it, and I even get a lot of pleasure out of telling other people about, how much fun it is just hanging out with you once a week. And we just keep doing it.
We do. We do. We keep on coming back for more. And
So I got
saying, yeah, go ahead.
so we've talked for an hour, and how would you summarize what you're taking away from our little chat?
I guess I'm taking, I guess I don't know if I would summarize. I guess what I would take home for myself, which is basically I'm hearing what I needed to hear. You know what I mean? That's really what's happening, right? It's like I'm taking in what at the moment I needed to hear. Or I would, I was open enough to hear it. Is that, when I go, or when I think when everybody goes in with a very limited way of thinking, we eliminate all possibility.
Yes,
And that's just, there is no space.
I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah.
That's my vote on the subject.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I think with that said, um, I really just want to encourage and invite people to keep putting those roller skates on. Be willing to try to do daredevil moves, no matter what age you are. And I don't mean it physically, like, take care of your brittle bones and stuff like that, but metaphorically, have a ball, trying new things. They don't all have to be income producing. Just something as simple as doing a little bit of different kind of art, pottery, or try yoga or something you haven't done before, and see if you can use it as a tool to learn more about yourself. Because frankly, that's our mission in life, and the whole road to wisdom and authenticity is through continuously testing your theorems about your own self. Who you are, how you respond to things. Are you able to install guardrails that you feel that are needed, or in some cases be able to amp your RPMs and horsepower up to a different level if you need to? Play with it.
Hmm. Sounds good to me.
Because I have a feeling, my experience has been, the world will greet you in kind with the energy that it sees you putting out. It will match its energy with your energy, and you'll be surprised what you will attract just simply by being attractive.
Mm. Okay. I'm thinking on that one.
There you go. Well, I think with that said, is there a bit of homework that you'd like to give our listeners at home?
No, I guess, our saying, our constant message, but really, depending on where you're listening from, if this is a holiday weekend for you, or if you're Canadian, then you might be coming off a holiday weekend. Then just be safe and enjoy and engage and interact with people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely like that. And I'd like to remind everybody, this is not a test. It's not a run through. This is your real life. Every moment that you spend waiting for your real life to come along makes it less likely that it ever will. in my humble opinion.
In your humble opinion.
So with that said, I love you all. I love you madly, Jan, and I'm so pleased that you choose to spend time with me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Bill.
You're very welcome. And we are lighting the candle, a world that works. Just go out and have fun, do great things with your life, and then come back and tell me all about it, please.
Sounds good. Report back.
Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.